Hi everyone, my name is Michelle Morris. I'm an Associate Professor in Nutrition and Lifestyle Analytics at the School of Medicine in the University of Leeds and a co-investigator at the Consumer Data Research Centre. And it's my pleasure to be doing this Q&A with Judith today, where I'm going to pose some questions first from myself and then questions that were submitted by our conference delegates. So there's so much of your talk that got me really excited, Judith, so thank you. But one of the things I just wanted you to maybe reflect on a little bit, and you touched on it on that last slide, was you started out talking about just how much data is within the system and, how can we bring that together? And the recent National Food Strategy, the plan that was released, had a recommendation for generating a national food system data programme, which I think has some alignments with Feed UK and what we've been trying to achieve there. And I just wondered if you had any kind of thoughts and learnings and what you think might happen and should happen next in that space.
Yeah, and I think, it's brilliant that government is thinking about including that in the white paper response to the National Food Strategy, because it's almost fundamental to everything else. It's really hard to imagine how you can do all of these complicated things without really good data. But I'm also conscious that I get lots of feedback that people say, well, we're going to try and boil the ocean, aren't we, with all of this data? And the answer is no, we're not. And there was also a piece around, well, actually, will there be mandatory reporting for a need for this data? But it'll only be for big businesses. But of course, even if it's for big businesses have to get their data upstream from smaller businesses. So it is a system approach to data. And therefore, we have to be really mindful that we should be collecting only the data that's essential, and that when that data is collected, it can be multi-purposed and it can be used by many people for many things. And when we talk about this, we talk about having this master data assortment. And whether that data assortment is nutrition data, whether that's data on animal health and welfare, whether that's data on greenhouse gas emissions, whatever it might be, that we're very clear that is the consolidated data ask. And if that happens, then actually I think there will be many stakeholders in the system who will be actually having to find less data than they currently do. Because at the moment, there are multiple data asks across all sorts of different people, everything from investors creating indices to charities and campaign groups wanting to report on performance on health, for example. Multiple stakeholders are asking for multiple points of data, and none of them are standardized. So if we could get this consolidated master data assortment really well defined, then I think it will be liberating, genuinely, in so many ways.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. I hadn't actually thought of that ask as being something that would streamline processes. So yeah, hopefully we'll see this the future vision, as you finished up on, not being as far away as it might have seemed, 12 or months ago or longer.
Yes.
My second question is a bit of a shift change, really. I've been really encouraged and excited to see that at this conference today, we have two awesome women giving keynote talks. Firstly, yourself and Lauren Sager-Weinstein up next. So do you have any reflections or tips for women and other underrepresented groups in their careers in consumer data science?
I've always worked in areas where women have not been the dominant force, as it were. So I suppose I've spent all my career thinking about that. I think the key thing for me is not necessarily being a woman, it's being an individual. And as an individual, finding someone who is more senior to you as an individual, who understands you and cares enough about you to tell you the bad things as well as the good things, and is geared up to working with you personally, because there will be loads of programs you can go on and loads of corporate programs that will push you through, women's leadership courses, various things. But, you know, in my career, I've had probably 2 people that have really looked after me, and as I say, cared enough to really tell me the the things that I didn't really want to hear, as well as the things I did. So that's the first thing. And I think the other thing is, I probably spend too long when I know things aren't right, trying to make them better. And I would say trust your instincts, because if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And therefore you need to get that out in the open quickly. I think women tend to be quite collegiate in that respect, and sometimes you just have to say, actually, this is not going to work. And I learned that lesson the hard way, probably, and wasted too much time on things that never were going to get better. That makes sense. But yeah, find a friend and trust your instincts.
Absolutely brilliant advice. Thank you, Judith. So now on to questions from the audience. Here is the first question. There is now widespread recognition that more still needs to be done to embed high quality data into planning and policy development. Could you say more about what you would consider to be some of the major data sources and types which are currently underexploited?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the big one is electronic point of sales data, because it's massive, and it tells you, you know, what people are buying and therefore probably what they're consuming. I know there's a slight difference in that, but what they're buying, what they're consuming, it tells us where those things are coming from, whether they're produced in the UK, where they come from overseas. We can collate huge amounts of insight that then can be acted upon from a policy or regulation point of view that we just don't. So most of that data is already digitized because it has to be, because of the very nature of it. There are lots of things that can be done with it, but also because of the nature of retail and consumer goods, there are lots of trials and interventions that can also be played around, where you know that the data that you're collecting and the reaction that you're getting to those interventions is absolutely spot on, because that data is so well defined. And I think, you know, that's a big missed opportunity. And I know that you do lots of work in that space, and potentially could do so much more if you could get your hands on that data. So finding ways to share that data in a trusted way, in a safe way, and some of the work that government are doing on some of those data platforms and sharing, particularly public sector and private sector data across multiple government departments, would be a massive step forward. Massive. When you think about how much data is still collected by surveys and self-reporting, it's remarkable, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think what might spring in people's minds now when you said that is, yeah, we all want to use that data, but data sharing agreements and the like are so challenging to agree. So just to kind of reflect back on something you said about how quickly data was shared in the pandemic, you know, within as quick a time as 36 hours. And I think many people in the audience might know that it can take years to sign a data sharing agreement. I just wonder if you think there's any lessons learned that can be very quickly brought in to kind of change that.
There were 2 things that made that possible. One was the trusted third party, and the other one that it was an equal sharing of government data and private sector data, and that the regulation and the law to be able to share patient data already existed, because within that regulation it talks about things that are in the public interest or in the individual's interest for that data to be shared. And I think that broader definition of things that are in the public interest or things that are in an individual's interest actually could be applied to other things, particularly around nutrition and health, particularly around water and air quality, for example. So I think there's something around public interest or public interest data that could be the unlocker.
Brilliant, thank you. And then just one last question, if I may. How do you balance the aspirational with the pragmatic, especially at the beginning of a project or relationship?
That is a good question, because obviously I'm quite an optimistic person, and I think big and bold and always want to shoot for the stars. Hence the conversation around, trying to boil the ocean with data. But you can do both. And I think it's really important, particularly with big long-term projects, to have early wins. And those early wins are normally the most pragmatic things to get on with. And I hate cliches, but the sort of low-hanging fruit. And a good example of that is where we are with Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions at the moment and collecting that data. Because most of that data at the moment isn't real data, it's secondary data, it's modeled data, and some of it's quite old. But we've got to start somewhere. And at least if we can say, we know that secondary data isn't ideal, and they're very, very averages with quite broad distribution across those averages. However, if we don't start, we'll never get going. But actually, the ambition is to get to a standardized way of collecting and calculating primary data, so that farmers that are doing the best things, manufacturers who are doing good work, can get credit for that at the consumer end of things. Keeping that vision in mind of where we're trying to get to, whilst at the same time doing what is within our gift right now, so that we can get started on that journey, is important. But you have to keep painting the picture of the step along the journey. And as long as what you're doing in the short term is consistent with the long-term vision, then people understand that. I think where people get frustrated is where everything is short term and is very pragmatic, and everybody knows it's less than ideal, but there is no vision about where you're trying to get to, and no plan, importantly, about where you're trying to get to.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you. So just again, thank you so much for your time today, Judith, for that brilliant talk and for taking the time to answer our questions.
Oh, not at all. And thank you for asking me.